What's up, Story Geeks? It's Daryl.
And Jay.
On the Story Geeks podcast, we love to dig deeper into geek stories, science fiction, fantasy, and comic books.
And today's topic is Spider-Man in the MCU, although we'll branch a little bit out of that here and there. Yeah. And specifically, when we dig deeper, it means that we'll be exploring the themes, characters, and thinking behind Spider-Man in the MCU to discover what it reveals about justice, hope, fear, love, violence, and anything else that's critical to our fandom and the world at large.
And we would love for you guys to join our conversation. So the best way to do that is to join the Story Geeks Facebook group. It's a fantastic place to continue our discussion on Spider-Man and for you to share your thoughts about anything geek related. So click the link in the show notes and request to join us.
Absolutely. And before you forget, click the subscribe button on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Podbean, or wherever you listen to podcasts. And if you're watching on YouTube, then just click the subscribe button on YouTube as well. You don't want to miss our upcoming shows. What do we have coming up, Daryl?
We have, my brain is broken. We have a Make It Better on Jurassic World.
That's right, yes.
With Anthony Holder from the Story Cauldron podcast, which came back for season 2 today. Unintentional plug. And then we have Ant-Man, Jurassic Park. Sorry, my brain is...
Yeah, we have lots of things coming up.
We do.
We had a top 10 geek movies of all time podcast. But one podcast I want to make you guys aware of as well is that Network 1901 is doing a podcast where Angie from Network 1901 is, for the first time, reading first issues of comic books. And Daryl's doing an intro on that on behalf of the Story Geeks. So definitely check out Network 1901 and what they're up to. You're going to probably hear me say Network 1901 multiple times during this podcast.
It's just how we spend half of our time now. We talk about this.
It's exactly how it works.
And it's not just us. There's like 3 or 4 other podcasts that do the same thing.
Yeah, I know. True. Everyone loves Network 1901.
We do. What can we say? So there you go. So yeah, thanks for listening in. And as always, the Story Geeks podcast is produced by the Reclamation Society.
That's right.
That is enough about us. Let's talk about somebody else.
We have a guest.
We have a fantastic guest.
We have an amazing guest.
We have Mr. Scott Nicewander from NerdSync. Scott, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me.
Tell us about NerdSync and let everybody know what you're doing over there.
Yeah, so NerdSync is a YouTube channel where we analyze comic books and superheroes and learn about the real world history, science, philosophy, culture that goes into superheroes and superhero stories.
Yeah.
And it's just a really fun time. I've been doing it for about 5 years now, and it's just been a blast. I love learning, and I love trying to show people that the world is interesting, but maybe the way that we've been taught in school is a little boring. So if we learn through superheroes, then maybe that makes people realize that philosophy and history can actually be really cool and exciting.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Sure.
And it fits so well with our audience. So if you like what we're doing here at the Story Geeks, definitely go check out Scott's channel, NerdSync, on YouTube. We should have a link to it in the show notes, so just go click on that, subscribe. You described it perfectly. Like we do, you dig deeper.
Yeah.
And you go into all of the things that are happening in the stories, why they're happening, the philosophies behind everything. Fantastic. Highly recommend you guys check it out.
Yeah.
For sure. Thanks for being with us today.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me.
He traveled all the way out here.
That's right.
Across the country just to be with us.
From the distant...
Not to go to VidCon.
Yeah, no other reason.
That's right, no other reason.
Well, we've been trying to set this up for a while now, so
I'm
glad it actually panned out.
It was awesome, yeah. It worked out perfect.
Nice that VidCon just happened to be happening at the same
time.
I
know,
That's
what
right.
a coincidence.
That's right.
Way to go. Okay, you love Spider-Man.
I sure do.
So let's talk about Spider-Man.
Let's
dive into some questions here. Spider-Man, I would say, is arguably Marvel's most popular character. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, 100%.
Why? What makes him unique as compared to other superheroes? So start us off. Tell us what you think.
Yeah, so I think Stan Lee himself has talked about this a lot before in interviews, and I tend to agree. And it's the idea that Spider-Man is one of the first superheroes that had a full body costume that covered him from head to toe. Yeah. And that allowed readers to project themselves into that character, because it could be anybody under that costume. Like, we know it's Peter Parker for sure, but when he's actually Spider-Man, you can't tell that it's Peter Parker. It could be you, it could be anybody. And I think that's what resonated, and and also him being a teenager, which is a big demographic for comic books, especially at that time. when he debuted. I think that is those two things are a huge factor to what made Spider-Man super popular, like immediately.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, I had a similar thought because I don't know the background. Like Scott knows the background, Daryl knows a lot of the background. I don't know the background as much. But the first thing that came up to my mind was, well, he's like one of the youngest ones, especially at the time. So, and that impacts his worldview as well. So he tends to be one of the most positive of all the comic characters that we see. He has lots and lots of energy. Life hasn't really worn him down yet. I mean, you compare like him to like a Batman who's so cynical and dark and like the world is evil, it must conquer. Whereas Spider-Man is more like there's bad people doing bad stuff, but I'd like to stop them. You know what I mean? Like so it's kind of like a different vibe. He has gone through some things, obviously with it depending on what with what you're reading. He's had his uncle die. He's had his parents be taken from him. But he's an optimist, and his passion drives him. And I think that that's really key to his popularity. And you said this, Scott, and I think it's so true. As a kid, you immediately identify with him because you're like, oh, cool, me. Right?
Yeah.
And he has all of the things that, like, as kids you hope for. Like, oh, what if I could do that stuff? And, like, what if I had a secret identity? And so I think, particularly for kids, and particularly for those of us who grew up with him, he's so relatable.
And I would add to that, too, like, when Spider-Man was being pitched by Stan Lee to Martin Goodman, who was the head at Marvel at the time, Stan always told that he had 3 notes. Martin Goodman had 3 notes. He said, "You can't make a character about spiders. People hate spiders. They can't be the hero. They can only be the villain." The second was, you can't have a hero that has real problems because heroes are supposed to be super. They're supposed to be away from problems, an escape from problems. You know? And the third one was, you can't have the main superhero be a teenager. Teenagers are sidekicks. So back in the early days of comic books, they would introduce these kid characters to, like, Captain America had Bucky, Batman had Robin. You would have these sidekicks to be something that the kid audience could relate to. And Spider-Man was the first one that was like, I don't need a hero. I am the hero, And I think that was such a huge revolutionary thing.
Yeah, I like how he's really the best picture we get of what it looks like for a normal person to be a superhero.
Yeah.
Because a lot of superheroes, even Superman and Batman, you know who they are.
Yeah.
As their alter egos, but you don't see it. You see the big superhero stuff. With Spider-Man, he's a guy he's a reporter. He's a high school student who happens to be a superhero.
Yeah, and like when he first started out, right? Like his first instinct was not to be a superhero. His first instinct was, I'm going to use my powers to get money. I'm going to use my powers to go on a TV show and like show off and get money, or I'm going to wrestle and get money. And it was only after he had the tragic accident with Uncle Ben.
Yeah,
spoilers. That he decided, maybe I should use my power. And I think that adds to that relatability. Is like, if people just got superpowers, I'm pretty sure their first instinct would be, how do I use this to get rich?
Yeah,
What
exactly.
can this do for me?
Yeah, exactly. It's a very selfish act, and it was only through tragedy that I became a superhero.
That's a really good point. One note, if you do hear like a bunch of noise coming, my house is under construction. So if the mics pick up any of that noise,
fourth wall.
Yeah, I know. If the mics pick up any of that noise, World War III hasn't broken out. Well, it might have broken out.
You know what? We never know.
We don't know. We're in the podcast booth and we're just going for it.
Life is chaos. Any outcome is possible.
That's right. But it's probably just construction. So sorry.
Awesome. Well, we're going to focus mostly on the MCU Spider-Man here. But we need to know, just overall, who is everybody's favorite cinematic Spider-Man. So, Jay, why don't you start? Who's your favorite?
It's not really even a fair question for me, because as soon as Tom Holland was introduced, I'm like, Tom Holland. Like, he's the guy. I love Tom Holland. It's that role. And I think that, like, I actually really liked Andrew Garfield's. But as I was looking at this, I could see that, like, Andrew Garfield played the role in a very emo way. And I'm not saying that negatively. He just was like an overwhelmed with emotion Spider-Man.
Yeah.
Whereas Toby Maguire played the role pretty dopey. Like, I'm Spider-Man, Yeah. I think Tom Holland has Garfield's charisma with Maguire's kind of younger perspective. And it just kind of works. I don't know. It works so well. I think he's kind of perfect for the role. So.
For some reason, when you said Tom Holland has Garfield's charisma,
Yeah.
I went right to the big fat orange cat.
Of course.
And I'm like, that doesn't make any
Yeah,
sense.
Also
like,
applicable, I think. Remember that scene in Homecoming when he was like, man, I really hate Mondays.
But here's a lasagna.
Yeah,
Who's
exactly.
your favorite, Scott?
I also am a huge fan of Tom. I love what Toby Maguire brought to the role, and we can talk about that in a bit. But like, I love Tom Holland's Spider-Man for one asset that no other Spider-Man has brought to the role, in my opinion, which is this idea that Spider-Man is a very unlucky character. He messes up a lot, little ways, big ways. Like he'll just like his suit. Like that's what I loved about Homecoming. His suit malfunctioned. He like a big part of the movie was exploring him screwing up. He'll do something and something bad will happen, or just like a little funny thing where he'll like trip over something or do. And it's just Spider-Man is a very clumsy, very unlucky character, and I think that Homecoming is the first movie that really explored that fully. I think he didn't feel like, because all the other Spider-Man movies, once he became Spider-Man, he was like pretty good at being Spider-Man, like almost immediately. But Tom Holland's felt like it was a character who was still learning, and I think that's why I really like it.
That's a great point. Yeah.
Yeah. He's my favorite too. I mean, I think he's the best balance. Like you were saying, Tobey Maguire was a little more lighthearted. I think you said dopey. I would agree with that. And Andrew Garfield was darker. And I love Andrew Garfield as an actor. I think he's fantastic.
I do too.
But he was a little darker.
Yeah.
Little hard to buy as a high school student, to be honest.
Yeah.
So I think Tom Holland just has the perfect blend. He can do dark. He can be dopey. He makes sense as a high school student. He's not, but he looks like one.
Well, and he also, like, you've mentioned this to me before, and I've just been paying attention to it, so this is more of your comment than mine. But he has the physicality and the athleticism that the other two guys didn't seem to have quite as much.
He could be Spider-Man.
Right. He probably
he can do all that
is.
stuff.
I mean, have you seen them together in the same room? I haven't.
Exactly.
But yeah. Okay, so well then it bodes well that we all love Tom Holland, because we're going to spend a
course.
lot of time talking about that. But really quickly, before we do, let's talk about Toby and Andrew and just some of the things that we did love about them and their portrayals of Spider-Man. So you want to kick us off here?
Yes. The thing I love about Andrew Garfield's Spider-Man is nothing. But I love Tobey Maguire. Here's what I love about Tobey Maguire's Spider-Man is I actually didn't care for his Spider-Man, but I loved his Peter Parker. He was the Peter Parker that felt so awkward and uncomfortable to be around. Like I couldn't tell if it was on purpose or just how Tobey Maguire is, but like when there are scenes of him as Peter Parker, you feel like, I don't really know if I want to be around this guy. Like he's very cringy. He's very very awkward, and I felt like, you know, that's a perfect portrayal of Peter Parker. He's supposed to be this guy who's not very confident, who's not and then you get the duality once he puts on the Spider-Man costume. Then all of that goes away, and he's just like, you know, really energetic, you know, swinging all over the place, going crazy, having fun. But once that costume is off, then he goes back into like really uncomfortable Peter Parker. And I think that's the part of Tobey Maguire's Spider-Man that I enjoyed. Don't care for Andrew Garfield personally.
That's awesome. I kind of feel the opposite way. So I'll dive into Andrew Garfield first really quick, because I think that what Andrew brought that we haven't seen yet from Tom, there's a little glimpse of it maybe in Infinity War, but he brought a depth of inner turmoil that I think it made sense in the context of what was it, The Amazing Spider-Man was the first one with him, right? The second one didn't quite, the whole film didn't quite do it, right? But the first one, I think he really nailed that inner turmoil. Sometimes maybe a little too much, where he started to feel like a character from Twilight as opposed to like a Spider-Man. He was an angsty teen, if you will, right?
Sure was.
And I think that style lends itself to a lot of range, which I think is really good. And I think we saw a glimpse of that range when Tom in Infinity War has his really classic scene there. I think that Andrew actually handled a lot of the banter, the Spidey banter, pretty well, I thought, as well. Now, Tobey Maguire, I think, more the stories he was in than the performance per se, but he did really good at playing off of his friendships.
Yeah.
And I think you see Tom Holland do that a little bit with Ned, but I think Toby really, like, every one of his friends was integral to what was going on in his life,
Yes.
and he played that off really well. Like, and you felt that with him. I think Tom could do it. Just Tom hasn't had that kind of exposure yet. I also thought that the Toby J. Jonah Jameson relationship was super fun.
Yes.
And so that was really cool too. So I think a lot of the story elements that were given to Tobey Maguire's character were really strong. And I think if Tom was given the same, it'd be even better probably. So that's kind of the two takes, I think, a little bit.
And I mean, just to kind of add on to that, like talking about the dynamic between him and J. Jonah Jameson, that goes back to this idea when he's Peter Parker interacting with J. Jonah Jameson. He's very timid. He doesn't want to extend too far. He tries to like hold back on Jameson in one part, and he just folds immediately. Whereas when he's Spider-Man, he'll just like joke around with Jameson, poke fun at him. So it's again, you kind of get that sense of a duality of the two characters.
Yeah.
I think I'm more in line with you, Jay. So I will say, growing up, I didn't read Spider-Man a whole lot. It was not one of my favorite characters. So, Scott, you can tell me if this is true. I think maybe being a fan of the comics helps appreciate the Tobey Maguire version. Would you say that's true?
Yeah, maybe a little bit.
Okay. Because for me, the Tobey Maguire version was just so goofy.
Yeah.
And maybe it's just because I didn't resonate with that. And then, to be honest, there's some people in those movies that I don't like James Franco and some of those other people too. But I definitely resonated more with Andrew Garfield. But again, felt like he was still too dark. Which I felt like they struck a really good balance of it in the first movie. And then in the second movie, not so much.
Yeah, the second movie just doesn't work for some reason. I'm not quite sure why.
I think the one redeeming quality the second movie has for me is like the near perfect comic accurate costume of Spider-Man. I think it's still my favorite Spider-Man costume on film.
Cool. I have to go look it up.
Yeah.
Cool. Okay, well, I think we're all glad that things are in Tom Holland's hands now. So let's move on to talking about that. So when we do these character journey talks, we like to go through each movie one by one and just kind of take a quick look at them. So we'll go through the 3 movies that Tom Holland's Spider-Man has appeared in and just talk a little bit about some of the guiding themes and what is his character like in those movies. So, Jay, why don't you start us off on this one and talk about him in Captain America Civil War?
Yeah, from a storytelling perspective, his role in Civil War is handled beautifully. Because there's a lot of ways that you could screw up adding Spider-Man in a movie that's not a Spider-Man movie. Like, there's a lot of ways you can make that bad. But, I mean, they introduce him as a newbie and almost immediately into one of the most important fights that the MCU has had at that point in time. And the guiding theme here to me is that Spider-Man is actually kind of being used by Tony.
Yeah.
And I think that that's kind of interesting because it shows that Peter is kind of gullible, impressionable, and has zero context into the scenario that he's entering, right? Which I think is really interesting because it makes him a perfect pawn for Tony. And I think that naivety sets up the groundwork for us needing to learn more about Spidey and where he's coming from, which then sets up Homecoming incredibly well. Yes. So that's kind of my take from that.
Yeah, what do you think? I think my favorite part of Civil War is the fact that they didn't recap his origin. Number one, because we all know what it is, but also because it's one of those things where, like, Jaws is really famous because it didn't show the shark for most of the film. Yeah. This allows, like, the fact that he just has brief little lines about, like, why he's Spider-Man or, like, the tragedy in the past that we don't really fully know about. I think that's really interesting because it allows the audience to, like, think about it, maybe make it worse than it actually is, to stew on it and be like, man, something really bad, without having to spell it out for everybody. I think it's a really cool narrative choice to set up his character in a way that holds back information so that you kind of project whatever you think onto him, and it's really interesting. It's a cool idea.
Yeah,
it is cool. It's really cool.
Yeah, and I love how we get to see him thinking this whole superhero world is so cool. Like he's all starstruck by meeting Cap, and he's just super excited to be a part of all of this stuff, and the fake Stark internship and all that kind of good stuff. But I think it's just super fun to see him there. I love how it gives us kind of a preview of how big the Marvel Universe could get after Civil War, with Black Panther as well. And I know we don't get a lot of him, but we get the silly wisecracking Spider-Man that we enjoy. Yeah. We get to see him interact with a bunch of other characters, which I really love. I know you tend to like the more standalone stories. Usually. But I love, throw a bunch of characters together. It makes me happy.
That movie is one of the movies, though, that I would say handles it so well that I can't complain about it.
Yeah.
It's so good.
Yeah. So super fun. So let's move on to Homecoming then. Scott, what do you think about his character in Homecoming?
I think he's really fleshed out a lot more.
Yeah.
I think you definitely see a kid who just wants to get approval by Tony. He wants to prove himself as a hero. He had this one battle in Civil War where he was immediately thrown into like this big superhero universe, and then he has to go back home and just kind of live his life, and he wants more of that. He wants more of that excitement and that adventure. But he has to prove himself, and he goes overboard, and he puts a lot of people in danger. And so you get a lot of interesting dynamic between him and Tony, and just also his personality of where he's coming from and what he wants to be as Spider-Man, I think is really interesting.
Yeah.
Totally.
I tell me if you guys think this. I feel like Peter Parker in Homecoming is kind of like Luke Skywalker in A New Hope, right? Like he's starts out on I think it's not quite the hero's journey. I don't think it maps to the hero's journey quite the same way that like Star Wars does, which is like on the nose kind of. But it provides this arc that takes Peter throughout this journey, and I think it's a perfectly characterized by Tom Holland, the way that Tom Holland tackles it and the way that it's written for him. It's written in a little bit different of a way, because what's interesting about it to me is that because it doesn't start with the origin story the way that we understand the origin story, it allows us to recognize that he's still so naive, and that his naivety is not necessarily coming from a place of hurt. Where it's coming in the other, because like when you brought it up, I totally forgot. I used to love the comic where he went and tried to be a wrestler first. Like that was great, right? Like, and you're right. He took like the first few selfish steps, but here he doesn't. Here he's like instantly like, I'm gonna go help people. I'm gonna be a part of this superhero deal, and I think that's a really interesting place to take him, and I think it works because of Tom Holland, his positivity, and because we don't see the tragedy, so we know it's there. And if we had seen it, we'd be like, why is this guy not more depressed or something about this? But instead, it gives him a motivation without us having to experience the emotional weight of it, so that when he's positive and naive, we're like, that's okay, he'll learn. And I really like that part of it. So I like that, and he seems a little bit younger too, right? Like he seems a little bit younger than the other Spider-Man. So
definitely,
it was great.
What I love about that movie is you get to know him through these quiet little moments in life. Like one of my favorite moments in that whole movie is when he's at the Thai restaurant with Aunt May. Yeah. And then the waiter like brings her like what was like a dessert or something like that. And Peter's like, oh, I think he larbs you, which larb is a Thai dish. But I just little moments like that. That's how we choose to get to know him, rather than, a more obvious approach of like here Peter's a nerd, here Peter's uncle died. I mean, important parts of who he is, but it's a lighter touch, and it's more of a John Hughes-esque touch.
Yeah. Definitely. Oh, that's a good comparison.
So. I like that. I also think that Homecoming is the first Spider-Man movie, in my opinion, that really hones in on the friendly neighborhood Spider-Man aspect. Because you get the scenes in the beginning where he's just kind of going around doing all these little things to help out.
That's a great point.
Whereas all the other movies, you really only see him when he has to do something big and heroic or whatever.
Yeah.
Whereas Homecoming, he's like itching for the next big adventure, but all he has are little things like helping someone, like preventing someone from stealing a bike or something, or like it's like all the little tiny things, and it's just I love that.
And once again, they lean on Robert Downey Jr. to make those sort of cheesy lines okay for us.
Yeah.
He says friendly neighborhood Spider-Man.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's
He
right.
does Earth's Mightiest Heroes and the Avengers. And all that.
Yeah.
We just accept it from him. It's okay.
He's flawless.
But another thing I love about that movie, I love the journey that Peter goes through in sort of becoming the hero. Like, you're right, it's not the classic hero's journey.
Yeah.
But even just the scene, and just so you know, spoilers are okay here, so dive into it.
Awesome.
Feel free.
Yeah.
But towards the end, after he's fought Vulture and he's got that, that wall caving in on him and stuff like that, and he's crushed underneath the rubble, and just the motivation to get through that and to get out of it and to go fight back and grow up and be the hero. I love watching him go through that.
That was honestly one of the most emotional scenes in an MCU film, I think, for me. It was such a tonal shift from the rest of the movie, which was like very fun and lighthearted, and then you get to this moment where like you feel like he's actually dying.
Yeah.
And like you feel that there are stakes, and that just, Tom Holland just acted so beautifully in that scene. Like you felt that anguish and you felt that pain he was going through, and it was just so well done. And also I love the idea, now that you mention like Luke Skywalker and New Hope, I can't help see the comparison between like Luke staring out at the sunset, longing for adventure, comparing that to Tom Holland's Spider-Man, like looking at the laptop with the big Civil War fight, just being like, I want that again. The comparison is so good.
Yeah, there you go. I know, totally.
Okay, so how about Avengers Infinity War? Scott, why don't you kick us off on this one? How do you feel about him in that one? Heartbreaking, obviously.
So heartbreaking. Are you kidding me? There was, obviously that scene brought tears to my eyes for sure. But I loved his, more relationship with Tony. They're really emphasizing the two of them. How he just wants to. He's still, after all the other two movies, he still wants to try and impress Tony. He still wants to help out. He still wants to be the guy, to save the day, even though he's so young. Like, you get the sense that Tony really just scared for him. Like, you go back, you shouldn't be here, sort of a thing. But yeah, he's great.
Yeah, they set up. Okay, so in hopefully everybody's seen Infinity War by now, but because there's going to be spoilers for that movie. But they set up his death scene so well to make it so heartbreaking.
Yeah.
Because here's a kid who has been the eternal optimist through all this stuff. They didn't show us him going through and experiencing the Uncle Ben or his parents' death. So because they didn't show us that, we look at this kid and go, it doesn't seem like we know that the tragedy's back there. We know that he's motivated by something that is probably tragic, but you didn't show it to us. So we see him as more kid-like and more innocent and more naive. And even after he faces off against Vulture, he's lost some of that innocence, but even that doesn't feel like he's faced off against the widespread consequences, because he's been battling between two good forces, right? Like, and then he's moving on to Vulture, which is a bad force, but it's kind of like a smaller bad force. It's not like a world-ending bad force. And then, bam, Thanos. You know what I mean? Like, and I think what happens there is that first, the pairing that I love the most in that film is when they pair Peter with Strange.
Yes.
Because you have like two completely opposing worldviews smacking each other in the face. Like, I'm the really optimistic kid who doesn't really know that much, and I know all of the arcane arts, and I'm very pessimistic about the world, right? And then you pair those two together, which is awesome. And I think that that works really well, because then when we see Thanos come in, like, as Peter is starting to really experience what it's like to be a hero with these peers that he loves, and it's like taken away from him. And it's just like, oh my gosh, how can you do that to us? Very, 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 very emotional scene.
Yeah,
absolutely.
And I like how he, in this one, more than even in Homecoming, he's jumping into being a hero for the sake of being a hero.
Yeah.
Not just wanting to be involved with the action and stuff like that.
Right.
like jumping up onto the ship, you know, and not necessarily thinking about the consequences, which is something I'm sure he'll learn as we go.
Right.
Assuming he's not dead.
But
but even when they kill him, you know, unquotes, kill him, we know, I mean, I guess we don't know 100% for sure, but we pretty much know that this is not the end of Tom Holland as Spider-Man. There's another movie coming, like, we know. But that scene was still very impactful, I think, because of how much we've come to care about him as Peter.
Yep. Definitely.
So, okay, so in the MCU specifically, and Jay, why don't you kick us off on this one? What do you think motivates Peter to be a hero? What helps him determine right and wrong?
Oh, that's a really good question. So what I love about the MCU portrayal is that they do not beat you over the head with, this is why he does what he does, which is what everybody else does. Because they go, with great power comes great responsibility. Boom, hits you in the face with that, right?
Yeah.
Then you kind of like, it's kind of like, oh, okay, I can't be a wrestler, right? Because I have to be I have this power. I can't just go use it. I have to go be responsible. And it's sort of like, it just tells you what the premise of the film is.
Yeah.
This is just kind of this thing where that trope is masked because now we have Tony Stark, who I really like because I feel like the mentorship of Tony for Peter is essentially kind of like a I think you're better than me and I want you to be the next hero.
Exactly.
And I think that that's really, really, really interesting. So I like that they don't go with great power comes great responsibility, and that just gives us a sense that I think that Peter is driven by hope. Because if responsibility drives you, sometimes that can be driven by guilt. Sometimes it can be driven by shame or something else. I get the sense that Spidey in the MCU is driven by hope, and it's a very different take than what we've seen before, especially on film. So I don't know. That's kind of what I had in terms of what he's others-centric, and it seems just to be an internal optimism and a hope for a better future.
Mm-hmm. And I think you nailed it. I think if you look at the first two Iron Man movies, especially Iron Man 2, you can see that Tony, very much like Tom Holland's Spider-Man, was very much, I'm going to be a hero for the sake of being a hero because I think it's fun and I think I can do it. Mm-hmm. There's that famous line at the beginning of Iron Man 2 where he's like, I've successfully privatized world peace. So it's like he's very arrogant about it. He's just in it for the kind of the attention a little bit. And I think he sees that Peter is very similar and he wants to steer him away from that path. He wants to be like, look, I see where you're coming from, but you have to be better than me. I've made mistakes. You remember Ultron? That was my bad. So we have to. I want to teach you to be better than who I am. And I don't know if Peter quite gets that yet.
Yeah. I like the line. I think it's in Civil War when he says to Tony, he says, "When you can do what I can do, and the bad things still happen, they happen because of you."
Yeah.
And he's not a dark emo character, but that shows a depth to his character that really, really sticks, I think. And so he can be the goofy guy, he can make the jokes, and he can do all that stuff, but that depth still holds strong, even just from that one line.
Yeah. I mean, that line is essentially a take on, with great power comes great responsibility without force-feeding it. It's basically saying, if you have the ability to do what's right, then you have the responsibility to do what's right. And that's, I feel like, in not so many words, they were basically saying, with great power comes
That's right. That's awesome.
Yeah. Well, we keep talking about Tony, so let's drift over to that question a little bit here. So we've talked, obviously we like the relationship between Peter and Tony. And we've talked a little bit about what draws them together. But Scott, what do you think? I mean, I know you said before what made Spider-Man popular is this idea that he doesn't need to be a sidekick. He can be the hero.
Yeah.
Yet this is a dynamic where he's not a sidekick, but he's definitely a mentee to a mentor,
For sure.
So does that undercut things at all, or what do you think?
I don't know. Maybe honestly, I think it might just a little bit. Just because Spider-Man is supposed to show people that age, teenagers, that like you can make a difference immediately. You don't have to wait until you're older like all the other superheroes are. You can just start now. And I mean, he does that. So, I mean, obviously we're not taking too much credit away from him, but the fact that he does so under Tony, well, I mean, I don't know, because even at the end of Homecoming, it shows that even when all of his toys were taken away from him, he's still gonna go in and do what's right. I think that's the strong part of Homecoming is the final act when he has to commit to just doing what's right, even though he's significantly depowered without the suit that he's become accustomed to.
And then Tony wants to give him the super high-tech suit, and he actually turns it down.
And he turns it down. Yeah. He's like, I don't need your help anymore.
Yeah.
You know? That's awesome.
What do you think?
I agree. I mean, I do think that basically what Tony's end game is, I think Tony's always looking. I know this is not an Iron Man podcast, but Tony to me is someone who has some of that guilt motivation because he knows that he's screwed things up. He created Ultron, like you said. He knows that he needs responsibility. We talked about this, I think, on the Civil War podcast, right? Like, he's the one that says, like, I need accountability. Somebody please add accountability to my life because I'm not perfect and I'm going to screw this up again, and I don't want that. But so I think when he sees Peter, it's so funny because he sort of rejects it in Cap. But when he sees Peter, he's like, well, maybe this is the next guy who can lead everybody. And maybe if I guide him the right way, he can do it without screwing up the way I screwed up. And it's kind of nice to see Tony try and like have Peter unlock those secrets. But I think in some ways, Tony's learning from Peter as they're working together, because it's like, oh, this is what an optimist looks like. Oh, this is what somebody would say, like, you're going to turn down a suit? Like, I would not turn down the suit. I'd figure out how to use the suit, right? And so I think that that's kind of a really fun relational balance that they're playing with there. And it works really well for the film because it's super fun. Yeah,
I agree. What do you think about Happy? We've talked a lot about Tony, but what about, how does the interplay with Happy come across to you?
He's interesting. I mean, I've always liked him as a character thrown into the MCU in little places. I like that he's getting more of an opportunity to shine. If I'm being real honest, I think it would have been better for him to die in Iron Man 3. Like, it would have been more impactful for the story. But I do like that they kept him around for a purpose. They put him back into the MCU with Homecoming, and almost like acting as kind of a liaison between Peter and Tony. Which is very, very interesting. I don't know. I feel like I would like to see him maybe used a little bit more. I have a theory that when the day comes when Robert Downey Jr. was going to leave the MCU, they might keep Happy around as like a Stark liaison or something like that. But yeah, I think I would like to see him used a little bit more even, I think.
I feel like Happy in Homecoming is almost threatened by Spider-Man. Yes. Like, they don't show you that explicitly. That's a good point. But he's kind of like, well, I've always been Tony's guy. Who's this kid? You know? It's like,
I definitely get it. He showed a lot of that in Iron Man 3, I think, too. When he was like updated to security, like he was overcompensating. He's like, I want to make Tony proud. I want to do this job perfectly. And I think, seeing that Peter is Tony's new golden boy, I think he's a little bit put off by that.
Yeah, I think so too.
I think that's a really good take. I didn't really have anything to add at all, but I do have a Jon Favreau story. I don't think I've told this on the podcast before. So my friends were like, "Hey, we should go watch the movie Made," which is sort of a pseudo sequel, like not really sequel, but similar cast to Swingers. So we went down to Orange, which is in Orange County, and we went to see the movie there. And Jon Favreau was there signing posters. And so I go up to get my poster signed, and he's like, "Who should I write this to?" I'm thinking in my head, like, that's lame. Like, nobody, like, why would anyone else want like a post? Like, why does it need to be signed to me? Like, it seems weird. So I'm like, "Oh, just sign it." And he's like, "Gonna sell it on eBay, huh?" And I was like, "Haha." And I wasn't. Like, I was gonna keep it, right? Like, it wasn't a big deal. Yeah. I'm watching Dinner with Five, which is a show that he was on, and it's with him with all these other actors and stuff talking about this. And this is before Iron Man ever came out. This is before he was asked to direct a bunch of these films and things. And he goes, "You can always tell the real jerks when they come up and ask you not to sign it to somebody because they're going to go sell it on eBay." I was like, whoa, he's really bothered by that. He's calling me out. And what I think is so funny about that was if you had told me that now this is going to be a guy who goes on to direct not only some of your favorite films, but then also he's going to be asked to do a Star Wars series.
Yeah.
I'm like, oh, I wish I would have handled that better.
Yeah.
I mean, not really. He has no clue who I am. But I just thought that was really funny because it's like, I've met that guy. And now he's doing this. That's crazy.
I've always been the same way, though. I mean, I don't get autographs that often, but I never want anybody to, like, say to Daryl or anything like that.
Yeah.
Like, I got Marv Wolfman's autograph recently.
Yeah.
And I just wanted him to write his name on this beautiful piece of art that George Perez had drawn. You know, I'm like,
right.
I just want your name, you know?
Yeah, because it's not so much for me so much as it is I respect you, and this is a cool piece of artwork, and it's cooler if your name is on it.
Yeah. Your name makes this more valuable.
That's right.
Mine makes it less valuable.
Exactly.
That's funny.
So, hey, real quick before we move on, we just want to let you guys know about several ways that you can access more content from the Story Geeks. So, first is our blog. Over at thestorygeeks.com, you can find out about our latest YouTube live shows and additional content written by our blogger, Ashley Pauls. So, check that out. You can check out things like our recent 100th episode with Josh and Angie Taylor, where we count down our top 10 geek films of all time.
Mm-hmm.
And then Ashley went ahead and did a blog with her top 10 as well. So,
that's right.
Go check that out. And then lots of other recent episodes on there and other cool stuff that we've dove into lately. So that's all over at thestorygeeks.com.
Yeah, if you dig the MCU, then our dig deeper into Captain America's character journey with Helen O'Hara is great to check out. And also, you can check out, if you're into Star Wars, you can check out our Reylo episode where we tackled Reylo and the concept of Reylo and why it's even out there. But thestorygeeks.com also has links to all the ways that you can support us. So you can support us on Patreon. Patreon is a website that allows fans to support creators like us, the Story Geeks. And when you support the show for as little as $3 a month, you actually get access to additional content, both audio and video content. If you love what we do, we would greatly appreciate your support. It really means a lot to us, and we give back to you by giving additional content, which is pretty cool. And actually, if you want to see some of the kinds of additional content that we give back, you can actually go on Patreon right now, and for free, without even supporting us at all, you can get access to our follow-up on our Top 10 Geek Films podcast, where Josh and Angie from Network 1901 joined us to talk about the honorable mentions that didn't even get onto our list. And there's a ton of those. So you can go check out Patreon. The link should be in the show notes below, so go check that out. Or you can just search Patreon for the Story Geeks and we'll show up there too. We also have a t-shirt shop, so if you go to shop.reclamationsociety.org, you can purchase Story Geeks merch. I'm not wearing one of the Story Geeks shirts right now. I think it's probably in the wash, but you can purchase one and support the show that way. If you're supporting a Story Geeks t-shirt, you know that you dig deeper into geek stories, just like we're doing here. So if you want to identify with that, be sure to support us and check that shirt out. And last, but certainly not least, we have another sponsor, Modern Mouse Boutique. Modern Mouse Boutique sells geek fashion accessories. They have some of the best mouse ears out there, hands down. Now I'm a Disney fan and I go to the parks all the time. If you're a Disney fan, then you should check out some of the stuff that they've got, because it's really cool, really classy stuff, and it's really produced really well. It's really, the design and the production standards are fantastic. So you can use code StoryGeeks, all one word, StoryGeeks, no spaces, StoryGeeks, and that will get you 10% off your next order. Head on over to modernmouseboutique.com. The link should be in the show notes. People love their mouse ears and love a bunch of the other fashion accessories that they have. 10% off, promo code StoryGeeks, no spaces, one word, StoryGeeks. Links to all of those things can be found in the show notes or on our blog at thestorygeeks.com. Thanks for letting us interrupt. Now let's get back to the show.
All right, let's dive back in. So, in the comics, Peter famously loses Uncle Ben, which is a big part of his driving force. And I think we get the sense that that's still true in the MCU, but we don't see it happen. So, I'm curious, Scott, start us off here. First of all, what is it about losing a loved one that is a compelling catalyst for a superhero's journey? And then also, how do you feel about the absence of Uncle Ben in Homecoming?
So I think, narratively speaking, losing a loved one is almost like a really quick literary shorthand to helping us sympathize with the protagonist. Because it's something that, even if we personally haven't lost a loved one, we understand what it would be like, or we can imagine what it would be like to lose someone that we care about. It's something that's so almost primal that we understand if someone's really important to you and you lose them, like that really shakes you up. And I think it's a bit of a trope, it's a bit of a cliche, but I always that doesn't make it inherently bad. I think if it's executed well, then it becomes, it doesn't matter if it's a trope or anything. And I think that Spider-Man specifically executes it perfectly, because it's this, it's that iconic scene where it's not just like Uncle Ben got killed randomly. It was by a person that Peter could have stopped if he had done the right thing. And that just eats away at him and shapes his whole identity and forces him to use his powers for good and instead of selfish reasons. And I think that, that's such a simple thing that everyone can relate to.
Do you feel like it's a gap in Homecoming because we don't get to focus on it?
Maybe a little bit, but I kind of what I was talking about earlier. I like the fact that we can imagine what it is, because I think it was done really well in the Tobey Maguire movies. It was pretty much perfectly ripped from the comics. Andrew Garfield was done a little bit differently, and they he never ended up like catching the guy. It was kind of a loose plot thread in this thing, but it was. I think. It's something in Homecoming or in Civil War where we get to imagine what must have happened, and that gap allows us to project something that is maybe even worse than actually happened, and that makes it feel a lot heavier and a lot like the fact that he won't talk about it and he doesn't mention it is something that is like, it must be really traumatizing, really fresh, even to the point where he won't even, like, we as an audience don't even see it in flashbacks or anything. And I think that adds to the mystery and the heaviness of that event.
What do you think, Jay?
Yeah, I think so. I'll just speak from my own experience. I don't think we can truly understand the gift that is life until someone close to us dies. Like I think that you kind of just take it for granted. Like, we're living. Like that's how you go about your every day, right? Like you wake up, I'm living. Like there's no other context that you have. So when I was 12, 13 years old, my mom was diagnosed with stage 3 cancer. So if you listen to the podcast a lot, I've probably talked about it. So you probably heard me talk about it. Well, I know I've talked about it. If you listen to the podcast, you've probably heard me talk about it. And I remember that when the stage 3 cancer was present, life suddenly became far more real. Like in other words, you wake up every day and you go, like, life is a thing. Because otherwise I don't really think that when I wake up in the morning, like, oh yeah, life's a thing. Right. But when someone around
exist.
it is what it is, right? And then the world becomes far more real and the world becomes far more dangerous. Yeah. Because now there's things out there that are intense. Now, my mom went into remission for 17 years, and I remember distinctly thinking that when her cancer came back, I would think this multiple times. I would go, you took all of those years for granted. And it's not like I was doing anything stupid. It's not like I was like just goofing around in it, but like to know that this is real. You knew it was real back then. You know it's real now because it's back. You took everything for granted in the middle. Is just such a it's a really difficult thing to tackle. We get so comfortable with life that when we're then faced with death, it just makes us so uncomfortable. And I think with superheroes, it's the same thing, only it's amplified. Like, I think what you brought up with in terms of Spider-Man directly is that when he's doing the other thing and then Uncle Ben dies, and he could have done something. Yeah. I mean, that's a really powerful moment for him to be like, oh, I took all of that for granted. Yeah. I can't do that anymore. I can't take it for granted anymore.
Yeah. I think, because I know from personal experience, like, having close loved ones pass away, you get this sense of like, what could I have done something? Yeah. And with Spider-Man, the answer is yes. He could have actually done something that would have made a difference, and that's the thing that tears him apart. And I think a lot of people feel that way, is like, what could I have done? And for most of the answers, it's probably nothing. You know, life is life, and that things are going to happen. But with Spider-Man, there is a tangible thing that he could have done to save Uncle Ben, and he didn't do it.
And I think the absence of Uncle Ben from Homecoming is interesting, because I don't think, like you're definitely right, Scott, when you say that, like, wow, it must be something intense. But the fact that we don't see it makes us not experience the emotion with him the way that it was done in like the Tobey Maguire. Yeah. Like we experience it with him. So it feels like, wow, that's something that's deep. That's something that's meaningful. But I guess I can move on because it seems like he's moving on.
Yeah.
In a kind of a different way.
Yeah.
Which I think gives us a more lighthearted portrayal of Spider-Man overall. But it's interesting. I think there's multiple ways to take it too.
You know, I would actually really love to see the character of Uncle Ben explored, even if they never show the accident that happens. Like you leave that part still a mystery, so you project onto it whatever horrible thing that your mind comes up with, because we're all weird people. But like, I love the idea of introducing him as a character in, like, I don't know, flashbacks. It doesn't even it could just be stories that like Aunt May talks about or something. Yeah. Like really fleshing out that character, but never talking about what actually happened, I think would make it even more like severe and really more tragic.
Yeah, I think the loss of a loved one, you're right, it is a trope, but I think if you really let it sink in, it's a great motivator. I keep going back to this quote. I pulled it up from Interstellar that Matt Damon says in Interstellar, where he says, we can care deeply, selflessly about those we know, but that empathy rarely extends beyond our line of sight. And I feel like if you take a superhero in the position where they lose somebody that they do deeply care about and that they know, then that sort of cautionary tale becomes something that they would care deeply about preventing other people from having to go through. So I feel like it informs a superhero's motivation to protect really
Definitely.
well.
I mean, especially modern Spider-Man comics dive into his philosophy of always trying to save the day, making sure that nobody dies, everyone's safe. Like he'll even blatantly say it. He'll be like, no more deaths. Everyone's gonna be fine. We're gonna figure out a way to do this without killing anybody. And I think that a big part of the reason is because of not just Uncle Ben, but of course Gwen Stacy. You know, the people that he's lost basically because of stuff that he's done. And I think that really affected him a lot.
So I wonder if this is just like wild speculation, but I wonder if after Avengers 4, we're going to see Tony die and then sort of be like Tom Holland's version of Uncle Ben.
Yeah.
You know?
Ooh, that'd be interesting.
I think you're right.
Yeah.
I think that'll do it. Do you think then that Robert Downey Jr. will give us one last line delivery of like, with great power comes great responsibility?
Probably in some sort of offhanded way.
I bet he will.
Yeah, it'll probably be super sarcastic too.
Yeah.
Okay, kid. I bet you're gonna go on and think that with great power comes great responsibility, right? Like,
yeah. Okay, let's talk about villains a little bit here, because I think the Vulture in Spider-Man: Homecoming is arguably one of the best Marvel villains. Would you guys agree with that?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah.
So why is that? What do you think makes him such a good villain? And do you think when Homecoming came out, his inclusion, do you think that sort of signifies an increase in quality from MCU villains? Because we've had some not so great ones. So what do you think?
Yeah, I definitely think so. I think the villains since Homecoming, and maybe even a little bit before Homecoming, have progressively gotten better. You know, obviously, like, Killmonger is another great one, I think. Even Thanos, I was really worried about, but I actually really liked him in Infinity War. But yeah, Vulture was just really awesome. I think Marvel is learning that you need to give as much or even more characterization to your villains than your heroes, because your heroes are going to be around for several movies, so that you can expand upon their character as time goes on. Spider-Man was already in Civil War when Homecoming came out, so having to spend a little extra time on the villain. I think the movie even opens with Vulture. Like forget about Spider-Man. Let's talk about Vulture.
It's all about Vulture before the before the Marvel logo comes up.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
And then a big part of his backstory and his personality is kept hidden from you until the big kind of twist reveal that
Which
like
is such a good moment.
I didn't see that coming at all.
Yeah.
I love my heart sank when that happened. I was like, no. And I think, and that's a great reaction to have in an audience.
Yeah.
And the fact that they were able to do that means that they really made their villains, especially Vulture, just outstanding.
And that scene in the car after Liz goes into the dance.
That's my favorite scene in the movie.
Oh my gosh, it's one of my favorites in any Marvel movie because
the visual storytelling of like when he figures out Peter is Spider-Man, the light turns green and it lights him up in green. And
the amount of control that he suddenly has over him.
Yeah.
Like, it's actually very frightening how vulnerable Spider-Man as the hero is right then and there.
And you feel like Peter, you can tell with Tom Holland's acting, he feels like scared.
Yeah.
You know? Like Vulture's just a guy and Spider-Man's got powers. And like,
Yeah.
I don't think he had the suit at that time, but like, he at least had superpowers and yet he still felt like powerless compared to Vulture.
We talk about this a lot where we talk about there's two types of really good villains, really strong villains. The first is the villain that you like literally know nothing about and is just like pure evil. You're like, why?
The Joker.
Yeah, right.
Joker
like there's not much backstory, but what's going on with him? Not much backstory, depending on which comic you're reading.
Sure.
But the other kind of villain that's fantastic is the villain where you go, not only do I understand why he's doing it, I can sympathize to him or empathize with him to the point where I could see myself doing something similar given the same circumstances.
I would secretly sell alien tech in order to protect my sons.
Right. Right.
I think, even with Joker, I think even though we don't know a lot about his backstory, I think he still talks. You can see bits of his philosophy throughout. He wants to prove that just one bad day can make anyone go crazy.
Yeah.
Right.
And I think with any villain, you're going to have to relate to them. You don't have to relate to that philosophy, but you understand where they're coming from.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I'm not a huge fan of villains who are just like the evil guy for the sake of being the antagonist. Like they have
just wanting to conquer the world.
Yeah, you know.
Ronin. Ronin.
Like even Thanos was like you could understand where he was coming from. He wasn't just evil for the sake of it. He had an idea and he had a plan.
Yep.
He was a bit twisted. He was a bit mad, but like you can understand. And I think Vulture's very similar scenario where like you get it. You get that this is a guy, like the opening of the movie shows that he's just a guy who's trying to earn a living and he keeps getting kicked around and like he wants to provide for his family and that's really all it is.
No question. Yeah. I think for me, I would probably put Killmonger is, I think, I had to think about this longer, to be fair, because Kylo Ren might fit in there somewhere. But I think that Killmonger is the best villain since Heath Ledger's Joker, which I think is the best of all time. And Killmonger, there's a geek group I'm in, and they were talking about like who's better, Thanos or Killmonger. And I think that Killmonger is better because you can actually track back to not only what their motivation is, but also why they have a passion for that motivation. Mm-hmm. It's very well-rounded in terms of I can see why he would have a passion for doing that, accomplishing that thing. Not just the motivation to do it, but also a rationale that makes sense for it. Mm-hmm. I think Vulture fits in that category. Thanos has a couple of other things going on that make him a really great villain, but Vulture fits into the Killmonger category in my mind, where you go, I kind of understand. It's not just a motivation to hurt other people because they've been hurt.
Yeah.
There's something beyond that. There's like, no, I want to solve a problem and I don't care how harsh I am or how hurtful I am in solving it. That to me is a Vulture Killmonger story. Yeah. Whereas like even if you see a Zemo story, he has plenty of rationale, but I really just want to hurt people for revenge's sake.
Yeah.
So I like him a lot. I think he plays really well. Peter plays great opposite him.
Yeah.
So
definitely.
How do you think Peter shapes Vulture in the movie?
Oh man.
I mean, we talked a little bit about the fear in Peter when he finds out who Vulture is and stuff like that. But how do you think Peter affects him? Because I think he does.
I mean, certainly by the end of the movie, he almost has a change of heart on Peter, where it's like, yeah, I don't like him, but you know what? I almost like a respect for him and a respect for what Peter does and what he stands for as Spider-Man. I think that's really interesting.
Yeah. I mean, what would you say? What is your take on that relationship?
I think maybe he helps. I always want to say Stanley. I don't know why. I always want him to be named Stanley Toombs, but it's Adrian Toombs. I think he helps.
Stanley Toombs.
I don't know why.
Friendly Stanley.
I don't know what.
Right. We'll say his middle name is Stanley.
Sure. That makes no sense.
That's right.
But I feel like he maybe actually helps round out Adrian's view a little bit. Like, yeah, I think he comes to respect him a little bit, and I think he starts to see that there is more consequence to what he's doing, and it's not always all about protecting his family. Because now Peter is close to his family and is suddenly more of a threat to him than anything else has ever been. And so I feel like that sort of gives him pause a little bit. But I guess the bigger question is, I'm curious what you guys think. At the end of the movie, do you think they are still enemies? Do you think he's still a villain? Because we get that post-credit scene, right, where he meets the Scorpion, I believe, because of the tattoo. You see the Scorpion tattoo. And he definitely protects Peter's identity.
Yeah.
The reason behind that, maybe we're not totally sure, but what do you think?
It strikes me as a very almost Peter in the comics has had several villains that very specifically don't like him, but they want to take him down in their own way. Like you have Scorpion and everyone who want to team up, do the whole Sinister Six deal. Yeah. Whereas I think some people, Green Goblin occasionally is a very personal, I want to be the one to take down Spider-Man. He'll team up with people as well when the situation calls for it. Venom is a really great example of Venom just wants to do his own thing. Venom is like, I'm not going to team up with anybody if I have the opportunity to. I want to take down Spider-Man. I feel like that's the vibe that I get from Vulture at the end. Is like, I still don't like him. I respect Spider-Man. I don't like him. I'm not going to help you guys take him down because if anyone's going to, then I want to be the one to do it by myself, almost like as a redemption. But, you know, I almost kind of get a vibe that he's almost reluctant to take down Spider-Man because he's like, you know, I kind of like this kid. He's kind of growing on me, sort of a thing. And it's a very interesting. It's I love villains who are very almost patronizing in that sense, where it's like, I could take this guy down, I could help these guys out, but I'm not gonna.
I think it's cool because I think it shows that the things that he's doing, he has a reason to do them, right? Because like we'll see this in like you'll see this in like organized crime movies. Right, where organized crime is occurring and it is occurring in its own ecosystem. So it's the intention of the people leading the organized crime is not to kill other people. But then they're forced to because they're forced to protect themselves from something. And I kind of get the same sense of Toombs or Vulture in the sense that, well, if Spider-Man can just leave me alone, I won't deal with them. Right, like if he forces my hand, okay. But I'm also not just going to give him up because I don't inherently want to see harm come to him. It's just that he keeps getting in the way of everything that I'm trying to accomplish. And I think that fits with Toombs' character because he's only doing those things because he's like, well, the government screwed me over. So what use do I have for them? I'm going to do what I'm going to do to save my family. But he doesn't have an inherent like I want to hurt other people. It's just if they get in the way of him trying to save his family and make the money he feels like he needs to make, that's where it comes up. So I don't think he's, unless Spider-Man was, again, to get in his way, it's kind of like, well, I'm trying to accomplish this thing. You're getting in my way. You got to do this thing.
Yeah. I think I might be reading too much into this because I tend to do that. But I think there might be a slightly deeper thing where, in a way, Adrian is cut off from his family now. Like, he's in prison. They could go visit him and stuff. But I'm sure he doesn't want them to see him in prison in that way. Yeah. So I almost feel like Peter is now a link back to his family. In a way. You know, not necessarily a direct way that he's going to exploit or anything like that. But I don't know. Like I said, I read into things, but
yeah.
I sort of get that vibe. Like,
well, that's cool because there's kind of a range in there, right? It's like no, he wants to take care of him himself.
yeah,
Right, which is like even him becoming more evil.
Yeah.
Then there's like, well, he'd only do it if Spider-Man's in the way, which he probably will be again if we were. And then yours is kind of like, no, they're kind of buddies.
Well, no, I'm not saying
buddies,
they're buddies, but I'm,
you know what I'm saying.
And I'm not even saying he's not still a villain because I think he probably is, and I hope he is.
Yeah,
because I think that's
great.
interesting. But I think he's developed maybe even a subconscious dependence on Spider-Man.
Yeah.
Because it links him back to who he used to be in a way.
I also think that he told Spider-Man more about like his like I think Spider-Man knows more about his criminal life, Vulture's than maybe he told his family. Like his family knows that he's a criminal and everything. They know like probably the basics, but I think he really, monologued at Peter and like really showed him his philosophies, and he thinks that maybe Peter's like someone who doesn't maybe agree but understands where he's coming from, and I think that's,
and vice versa, Peter knows more about his personal life than any of the other criminal people that he dealt with.
That's true.
So Peter's really closer to him than just about anybody else.
Yeah, those are great points.
So let's talk. There's a lot of different stuff in Spider-Man Homecoming that we haven't seen in past Spider-Man films. So I want to kind of go through some of those and see what you guys think. So it was fun for me to research this because, like I said, I didn't read Spider-Man growing up. I know the big stuff. I know about Mary Jane. I know about Gwen Stacy, Uncle Ben, like, that kind of stuff. And so for me, when I saw Homecoming for the first time, to me, it felt like they created a lot of characters.
Yeah.
But when you go back and research it, they really didn't. Like, they just pulled different ones in.
Yeah.
So things like Liz actually is a character.
Ellen.
She's not the Vulture's daughter in the comics, but
no.
Little
work. But it was good.
Yeah.
I like that twist.
Ned as well is a character from the comics.
That's right.
And so on and so forth. So I want to just kind of go through a few of these and see what you guys think, and you being kind of our resident Spider-Man expert, you can tell us what you think. But let's start with the suit, with the tech suit that Stark gives him, or Karen, as he comes to call her.
I actually really, I was skeptical about this going into it, seeing all the different, like, it basically felt like a Spider-Man version of an Iron Man armor, because it kind of was, you know?
Yeah.
And I was very skeptical about it, but it grew on me because it goes back to that thing I talked about at like the very beginning about how Spider-Man is a very clumsy, very unlucky character, and I think the addition of the suit made it so he had these moments where something backfired or operated in something that in a way that he didn't expect, and I think that kind of showed that Spider-Man isn't like this perfect hero who's always going to do everything flawlessly. He's going to screw up, he's going to hurt himself or do something silly, or maybe even he'll use a quirk in the suit to be creative and figure out a creative solution to things, which also shows off his brilliant mind. So I was skeptical about the suit, but it definitely grew on me. I think in future Spider-Man movies, I would like to see the suit kind of return to a little bit high tech, but not as crazy as it is
not
in
500 different modes. Or
right. No, nothing as crazy as that. I mean, not even like I like the Iron Spider in Infinity War. I think that's a really fun callback to the comics.
Yeah.
But I would like for that not to be his permanent costume.
Right.
I would like him to just to have a couple little gadgets and gizmos here and there, because he does in the comics, but like, I don't need it to be crazy.
Totally.
I think so. This is really interesting from a storytelling perspective, because in the context of this story, it works flawlessly.
Yeah.
It makes sense. You've got the mentor relationship with Iron Man. And I have no complaints because I'm always looking for like, why is this happening? They fill in all the blanks. Like all the whys are there from a storytelling perspective. If I remove myself and say like, okay, now what do you really think of that? Not because they told you this is the way it is, but just because you're going to respond to it. I don't really like. So I love it in the context that it's in. But if you ask me like, no, what do you think about it? No, I don't really like it, because I do think that he becomes Iron Man Jr. As opposed to Spider-Man.
Yeah.
So I kind of agree. Like, I hope they don't take it too far. They've already kind of taken it farther than I would have been comfortable with. But again, I only think that subjectively if you take me out of the story. When I'm in the story, there's no complaints because it works.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I like it. I think maybe it's a tad bit overused.
Yeah.
In the movie, I think we could have done with less scenes for him to have the wide-eyed. Oh, this is so cool. You know? One of the things I love so much about it is actually outside the story is just who they got to voice Karen. Just makes me happy.
Remind me who it is.
It's Jennifer Connelly.
Oh yeah.
Who is married to Paul Bettany.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Voices Jarvis.
Oh, there you go.
That's really funny.
It's a nice little connection there.
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
How about that?
Great. And I did like the fun little interactions he had with her. And I think like him locked in that place for like overnight, just talking and just being like, I don't know, what do you think, Karen? Should I tell? You know,
it's like, how long have we been here? 35 minutes. What? That's crazy.
It was a fun, it's a fun kind of character to bounce things off of.
Yeah. How do you feel about a younger Aunt May? Because typically what we've seen before is Aunt May. I mean, Sally Field was a little bit younger, but typically Aunt May is sort of the older, nice gray-haired lady.
Very old. I actually liked the younger Aunt May. I thought it made more sense. It makes sense to have a younger aunt than a super elderly aunt, I think, in most scenarios, you know. And I thought she was just a ton of fun to watch as well. Like her character is like, I think she was given more personality in the few scenes that she was in. Her and Peter's relationship, you could really see how much they cared for each other in just the few scenes that she was in.
Totally, yeah.
Yeah, it is funny because if you think about it, it does feel like Great Aunt May.
Yeah.
Right. It doesn't feel like, oh wait, that's his aunt.
Like his grandma.
He's like his grandma. So I will say that totally feels true. I work at a university, and I'm getting old. And what's funny is that in my context, when I see this may not be true. I have no data points to prove this, but I feel like when I was younger and I would see my grandparents, they seemed real old, right? And my parents seemed like pretty old. That context may still be true because I have aged and I don't see age the same way. Yeah. However, I will tell you that from what I remember of my parents being Aunt May's age versus what I see in the modern day college students' parents, I'm like, they look young, dude. Like society is kind of like, it seems like society has said youth is more important than it used to be, and we've seen people kind of adapt to that, so it kind of just feels like the way that the world is working now.
Yeah.
I don't know.
That's interesting.
Yeah,
I think it makes sense. I think it also gives us a little bit more to latch onto for her character. Not that you couldn't get that depth from an older actress, but this just sort of has a vibrance to it that lets us relate to it a little bit better and not just automatically put her in the box of grandma.
Yeah.
You know?
I feel like, previous movies, especially the Tobey Maguire movies, made Aunt May feel like a grandma. And I think as they've aged her down a little bit in the consecutive sequels and reboots and whatnot, I think it makes Aunt May feel more like almost more like his mom in a sense, which I think is the vibe that they want to go for, is like, not a grandma, but like an actual mother figure to Peter. And I think, it's just a visual change from someone older to younger, but it makes, I think it's an impact.
Yeah.
She really does feel like his mom. Like you can forget that she's not his mom while you're watching the movie.
Oh,
genuinely.
Totally. Yeah, totally agree.
So how about the inclusion of Ned? So Ned actually is a character from the comics. Ned leads and becomes a hero in his own right for a while, right?
A little bit, yeah.
But in the comics, he's more of a colleague at the Daily Bugle to Peter, right?
Yeah.
As opposed to as a fellow student. But what do you think about Ned?
For sure. I think Ned was, he was great in the movie. I loved him a lot. He was very funny. I don't know if they're going to take the path with him in the comics of actually turning him into a more prominent, person as well. But like, I like the idea that he...
Who is it that he becomes? It's one of the goblins, isn't it?
Yeah,
like he puts on one of the goblin suits.
Yeah, I think it's Hobgoblin or something.
Okay.
All the goblins are confusing to me. But I think he becomes a villain. And I think... I don't know if they're going to take that path in the movie. He seems a bit different. I think they are
the guy in the
really
chair.
he's the guy in the chair. They're really leaning into that that kind of trope a little bit, and I think it's great. I think he nails it. The actor they have for him is very fun and very entertaining to watch.
Yeah.
And I get the sense that, you know, he and Peter are just like really good friends, and I think that's a good dynamic to have, because typically in Spider-Man, you know, stuff, his best friend, you know, especially in the past movies, is like Harry Osborn. And I think that's a fun dynamic to pull off, and I'm glad they went a different route in this one. And they're just like, here's a different character, still kind of goblin-y, but, you know, different attitude altogether.
Yeah. And growing up a geek kid like they were in that movie, I feel like they nailed the friendship between two geeks really well.
Yes. Like, Ned felt like a fan of comic books in a comic book movie. Yeah. And I loved that.
I totally would have been excited to go over to my buddy's house and put together the Death Star.
I still want to do that.
Yeah, exactly. That's what we're doing after the podcast, actually.
Right.
So I think the inclusion of Ned is... so I love it when someone takes a character, they make the character different, and they embrace that difference in every way possible. Because here's another circumstance where when you have... with great power comes great responsibility. That turns you into, it can turn you, if you're not intimate with your relationships, into a loner, which then adds to your angst, adds to your feeling of push and pull to all the characters around you. You mentioned the relationship with, name slipping me. What's the name of his friend in Tobey Maguire?
Harry Osborn.
Harry Osborn.
Yeah.
His friendship with Harry Osborn is this tenuous one, because it's like, I can't tell him what's going on, but I like him as a friend, and he's dealing with some issues, and I've dealt with some issues, but we can't be intimate because I can't tell him these things. All of those things work to create emotionally complex Spider-Man. Mm-hmm. But when you give someone a friend that knows you so well, they know what your secret identity is, now he has somebody that's like, you know what, with great power comes great responsibility, but I've got a buddy in this. Mm-hmm. Like, it's not all on my shoulders, it's on our shoulders, and he can help me out. In Infinity War, he does. I need a distraction, you know, and immediately, like, oh, I'm helping him out because I know he's going to go do something cool. Yeah. And I think that is so awesome. And so the way that they've embraced, we're not telling the same Spider-Man story, it carries through in all these other areas, and Ned is one of the best ways. And he's also such a fantastic character, and he's hilarious.
He's so fun.
There's so many moments in Homecoming that just cracked me up because Ned was in them. So.
And I think I think Ned also provides Peter an opportunity to gloat about the superheroics that he's so proud of. Like, I interacted with these guys. I stole Cap's shield. You know, he gets to relive a lot of those moments, which I think helps him get through the fact that, you know, Tony's not calling on him anymore.
Yeah.
I will say, if they bring Harry Osborn into the MCU version, I hope they cast somebody who doesn't automatically look evil.
Yeah.
Because I think both James Franco and especially Dane DeHaan just looked like they were ready to take that turn and be evil, you know? I want somebody with a little bit more mystery, I guess.
You don't think that Willem Dafoe looks super normal?
The man who already has a goblin face?
The living Joker?
Exactly. It's like, can he smile in not an evil way? I'm sure he can, but it's just he has a perfect look for that. Yeah.
You know what? I will say, this is off topic, but there's a movie in which Willem Dafoe, for me, actually does play a very likable and heartwarming character. And it's a weird movie to say that about, but it's John Wick.
Oh.
Interesting.
He also, Josh is in the room producing the show, and Josh and I did a
thumbs up for that comment.
Yeah, well, Josh and I did a show about Jeff Goldblum. We walked through all the movies of Jeff Goldblum, and he's in a couple of them at least. Josh, yeah, and one of the ones I would say he's really endearing and really awesome in is Life Aquatic.
Yeah,
like he's totally somebody where you're like, that guy's awesome, and he's trying to like have a relationship and trying to be somebody that it's great. So I think he can be. He can also play a really villainous dude.
Yeah, I think he's got a range, but they usually use him for one thing.
That's right.
How about Mary Jane? So typically Mary Jane is the supermodel type, right? Mm-hmm. She's the perfect woman. Yes. Yeah. in this, Mary Jane actually would have fit really well with Andrew Garfield's Spider-Man because she's emo. She doesn't care about anything. She's not the obvious like hot girl at school.
Sure.
You know. So what do you think about the Zendaya version?
I love her so much.
Yeah.
I think she's great. I think, there was at the time a huge internet backlash about like, she's not actually Mary Jane or, whatever. But like, come on. She's great. I think she was very fun and very entertaining to watch as well. I want her to have bigger roles in the future movies because I want her character to be fleshed out more. And I think, I don't know, she was an interesting dynamic to throw in with everybody else who seemed very like optimistic and like, yeah, let's go do this and save, especially like compared to like Ned or even Peter. And it's just having that character who's just like, no, I'm just going to do my own, whatever. It doesn't matter. Like it was fun to have.
Yeah, I think too, like, I like the fact that Marvel is keeping some of its heroes very traditional. Their Cap is very traditional. Yeah. But also being progressive with some of their characters. And by progressive, I'm not talking about politics. I'm talking about they're saying this is basically the standard character, but we're actually morphing that character into this new character. And they're different. They're not the same of what you've seen before. Yeah. And I think you've got to do that because when you're telling stories, when you're retelling stories, you're telling them to different generations. And so different generations are going to react differently depending on, and I think that what we're seeing from the Mary Jane now is much more identifiable to the generation now than it would be if you had included the other Mary Jane, the more traditional Mary. It'd be more like, we don't encounter that person as much anymore. You know, it doesn't make sense to us. We don't gravitate towards it. Yeah. So
for sure. And I agree. I like Zendaya. Is it Zendaya or Zendaya?
I never know.
You say it.
Yeah.
But I like her a lot. I really liked her in The Greatest Showman, and I think she's making interesting choices. But one thing that will be kind of fun, because I love the different take on the character too. I think it's really cool. But
especially if we're 3 Spider-Man franchises in, like let's get it exactly.
Right. But I love that. So in the comics, she's taller than him, right? A lot of the times, like she towers over him.
Yeah, she's a supermodel for sure.
Which, if they let things be as they are in reality, will be the case here too. Like Zendaya is way taller than Tom Holland, so I would love to see them just let that be represented in their future together. Yeah, I think that'd be fun. Okay, just one more of these. Just a different take on Flash Thompson. So, looking back in the comics and the other versions of the movie, Flash Thompson is the jock. He's the bully. He's the bruiser. Yeah. And in this one, he's really more of he's got like an intellectual superiority complex, and he's snarky. And so, what do you think?
It's another thing where they kind of took that on its head. I think what I love about it is, the whole jock bullying the nerd thing is very much, I think, like of the time of the 60s when it was written. It was very tropey, very cliche. I think what this does, maybe unintentionally, maybe subtly, is almost kind of hint at the fact that like, hey, anybody can be a bully, anybody can be horrible. It doesn't. Even the smart people are sometimes the worst. And I like that idea that they didn't make it so tropey. They didn't make it, like cast a role like bully is jock. Instead, they made it like no, he's on the what team is it? I can't remember.
The debate team.
The debate team or whatever it is. Like, I like that he's basically a peer, a colleague of Peter essentially, and it's just like, but still kind of hates on him a lot. I think that's an interesting take on it.
Yeah. I have nothing to add.
I just love, I agree with everything you said, and I like that it makes him seem a little bit more vulnerable as a bully too, because we don't get to see that a lot. Like a lot of times, bullies are just jerks and they pick on you, and that's it. But in reality, if you're a bully, you're probably incredibly insecure to begin with. Yes. So we get to see a little bit of that with him.
We see that, and I think that's a huge thing that like a lot of the other movies just show him being like a bully for the sake of being a bully, you know? And I think here you not only get to see a little bit more of his personality and kind of like his insecurities of himself and like how he's actually not as tough as he thinks he is. But I think also it shows, this is the first Flash Thompson on film that I felt is genuinely annoying in like the best way, because it makes it feel like, yeah, he's annoying. That's how a bully of his age would be. He would just make terrible dumb jokes all the time and think he's all funny and whatever, you know.
Totally. I will say, however, that I have a soft spot for the Flash Thompson from Sam Raimi's trilogy.
Yeah.
Because it was played by Joe Manganiello, who...
I didn't know
Whoa,
that.
I didn't know that either.
Yeah. And it was one of his first film roles. And it's funny because he looks like the bully. He's huge. He's ripped. He looks like that guy.
Yeah.
But he is a huge geek.
Yeah.
Of course, yeah.
And his story is that he got picked on a ton for being a geek, and that's why he bulked up.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
That's awesome.
So it's a fun little inside thing to have him playing Flash Thompson. He wanted to be Peter. Like, that's what he tried out for, but he was too big to be Peter.
Course.
Like, he just didn't fit the stereotype.
Yeah.
But
I love the idea that the scene where he like bullies Peter, like it shows Peter kicking the crap out of him pretty much, like almost getting his comeuppance. And I love the fact that inside Joe was like, yeah, this is what I always wanted.
exactly.
We'll have Joe on the show sometime.
Man, that would be so great.
We'll get him on.
I've heard other interviews with him, and he seems like such a cool dude. He's so fun to listen to. Okay, one other thing I want to talk about before we start to dream about the future a little bit is we have a little hint of Miles Morales in this movie. We get to meet Aaron Davis, played by Donald Glover, who is in the comics Miles Morales' uncle. Mm-hmm. And if you're listening and you don't know who Miles Morales is, he is another Spider-Man. Started as the Marvel Comics Ultimate line of Spider-Man, but has now been morphed into the main continuity and is just another Spider-Man.
Yes.
So, how did you guys feel about the inclusion of Aaron? Do you want to see Miles in the MCU? What do you think?
I do. I think not for a couple of years, though, because I think something that makes Miles really interesting is that he is a little bit younger than Peter, and Peter already is very young in the MCU. So I think they need to age him up a little bit and then introduce him, almost like redo, like once Peter ages out of high school, which he's almost sure to do as the MCU goes on, then we can introduce Miles as a high school student, almost like going back to the beginning.
Yeah.
And I mean, obviously, Miles was inspired by Peter, which is why he, became the next Spider-Man after Peter, spoilers, died in the Ultimate Comics. And I think I like the idea of, like Peter having fans. Like, I feel like he needs to make a big impact. I think Spider-Man so far in the MCU has made pretty okay stuff. Like, he's made some waves, but I think he needs to make a huge impact in that universe in order to inspire people like Miles to eventually come in and kind of take over a little bit. And I don't know if they're gonna have him take over or also be Spider-Man with Peter. Who knows? The possibilities are endless there.
Yeah.
How do you think the two of them would affect each other if they were in the same film?
Well, I mean, they've interacted before in the comics.
Yeah.
And I think, I don't know, it would almost be like, I like the idea that Peter, if we age up Peter, then we introduce Miles as a high school student, it's almost like recycling the idea of what Tony sees in Peter and tries to mold him.
Yeah.
Peter will see that in himself in Miles and try to mold, try to help him out along the way as well, which I think would be cool. Because I don't think they're gonna kill off Tom Holland to introduce Miles. I think they're just they're probably just going to introduce Miles and then have them maybe one of the Spider-Man sequels will just be called Spider-Men. Who knows? But yeah,
comics
I think
have gone nuts with different Spider-Man.
Oh, for sure.
There's tons of them.
And I like, I think it would be fun, like almost poetic to have Tony and Peter's relationship shown again in a new context with Peter and Miles, because it would show how far Peter has come as Spider-Man. If he's learned a whole lot and wants to pass that knowledge on. I think that would be really interesting.
For sure. What do you think about Miles?
Okay, so this kind of bleeds into my next answer a little bit, because I already know what the questions are. Daryl shared the questions. But there's something that's maybe too morose about me that kind of loves the idea that they would be bold enough to say, no, Tom Holland is done. Like he's gone. He's like, there's no coming back. We're not reversing time. It's over. And if that was the way that Miles Morales was introduced, he is supposed to be a whole lot younger. I don't have a lot of context to Miles Morales because I got out of Spider-Man comics before he was kind of sort of introduced, or he might have been introduced, but I was introduced to older Spider-Man comics.
Sure.
But I do think there's something really bold about that because I would say that the foreshadowing here, it's kind of like a Last Jedi moment. The foreshadowing seems to go right in alignment with what you're saying. From a short foreshadowing perspective, I would expect Tom Holland to sort of start to morph into the new Iron Man, and then he goes, well, it would be great to have a Spider-Man, so let's, Miles Morales is the new Spider-Man. But to subvert all expectations and be like, the best Spider-Man you've ever seen doesn't exist anymore. We're moving on. That would be crazy. So I'm not rooting for it per se because I love Tom Holland as Spider-Man, but it's so intense.
So there's a old, it's not actually that old. A couple of years ago, there's a comic book that's not canon, unfortunately, because I love the idea, but it focuses on Thanos. He finally gets like the Infinity Gauntlet and he wipes out all of life on the planet, and he realizes the dangerous, like how little value the universe has after he wiped out everything. And he realizes that he has to set things right and bring life back into the universe. And one of the parts at the very end that I love is that he resets reality so that all deaths are final. Like the whole comic book cliche of heroes coming back and fake out deaths. He resets it so it's like no more. If a hero dies, they're done forever, which is why I hate that it's not canon, because I would love for Marvel to be that ballsy with their
exactly.
And I think it would be really interesting if they took that route after Infinity War, whatever the next Avengers one's going to wrap up that storyline. If they're like, look, we've had fake out deaths before, Coulson, Fury, even Happy in Iron Man 3 was on the brink of it. There have been so many people who have almost died but not quite been there, and I would love if they really just said, nope, from now on, even Thanos himself says it in Infinity War Part 1 where he kills Loki, spoilers, when he says like no resurrections, no tricks, and it kind of sets that line of reasoning, and I would love for Marvel to commit, and if they did kill off Spider-Man, to make it a big thing and be like, no, that you think we're not bringing him back. You think we're bringing him back? We're not bringing him back.
He gone.
Move on. Miles Morales, bring him in.
Yeah, that'd be awesome.
That would be cool. Although I would love to see. So what I would like to see from Miles is Peter still being alive. Basically, I want to see Miles be the first legacy character in the MCU and see him have to deal with that. And I know it's possible that maybe Bucky would become the first legacy character because he might have to take over his Cap if we lose Steve Rogers. But I want Chris Evans to stick around, so hopefully that's not going to happen. And I would like to see Miles Morales be the first one to become a character who is named the same as another character who already exists as that character. That was really roundabout, but I think you get my point.
I gotcha. As a side note, I have this idea that I just thought of where where we have, if Captain America dies in a future movie, and it's between Bucky and Falcon on who's going to become Captain America, because they've both become Captain in the comics. I would love if there was just a whole Bucky Falcon buddy road trip movie where like maybe they need to deliver, like maybe Steve wants to be, like super simple premise, Steve wants to be buried in a very specific plot, maybe next to Peggy or something like that, right? So they have to take his casket and drive across country to put it in a very specific spot. Villains might want to come in to like maybe get some of his blood and like get some super, so like there's some threats, but it's all just those two trying to argue over like who gets to
it's just a road movie.
It's just a road trip movie with some like, and I love that idea.
That's awesome.
Let's make it happen.
I like it.
I'd watch it.
Okay, we've already started a little bit, so let's just go for it. Let's dream about the future.
All right, Bucky Falcon road trip movie.
Yeah, we got that down.
Step one.
Tom Holland's dead. We got that down.
We got that all done out of the way.
But no, what would you guys like to see about a future Spider-Man? I know you're excited about the possibility of Mysterio showing up.
I have been on record on at least a couple podcasts or live streams laying out my 3-movie structure of Spider-Man.
I'll
And
lay it out
part
again. We
part
haven't heard
2, so part 1, Vulture, that was just a given. I wanted to see where they were going. So
Sure.
I have my 2 sequels planned.
All
My
right.
second sequel was always going to be Mysterio.
Okay.
Always.
How do you feel about Gyllenhaal?
I don't hate it.
Okay.
I
think Jay probably hates it.
Yeah, he's never. I don't think he's ever been in anything that I've loved.
that's how I feel, too.
Yeah, I don't know if I've necessarily hated him and said, well, that's not true. I didn't. There are a couple movies that I'm just like, oh, really? But I don't know. I'll give him a shot if that's the route they want to take. I would love. My big thing about Mysterio, though, is I know they're not going to, but I would love if Marvel embraced practical visual effects for the movie because that's who Mysterio is. He's a filmmaker. He's a guy who specializes in practical effects to fool Spider-Man.
Do you want him to have like the fishbowl for a head?
Of
and
course
stuff
I
like
do.
that?
Are you kidding me? I would love it. I would love, but like I know they're gonna CGI everything
Yeah,
because it's
yeah.
cheap and it's easy. But I would love for them to embrace the idea of like this is a character who specializes in practical filmmaking. Let's make a film practically. But so that was always gonna be my sequel. Was we have Vulture who tested him almost through his like philosophy and whatever and
Sure.
just like a moral standpoint. Mysterio's going to challenge him most likely by having a small army of threats. That's Mysterio's whole thing. Is he plays mind games, and also he usually has like robots or like other illusions that would trick Spider-Man mentally to kind of hone his powers. I think that's a really interesting way. With sequels, especially superhero movies, you have to make your villains seem different. It's the reason why in Dark Knight Rises they didn't want to do like Riddler because it would have felt too much like Joker.
Yeah,
so like we have Batman tested mentally, now we have him tested physically.
Yeah.
And I think you have to change it up like that. So I think Mysterio would be like a more mental challenge towards Spider-Man. And then
Real quick.
Yes.
I haven't read a whole lot of comics with Mysterio in it. Can he pretty much just do anything?
So he's just a dude, but like he builds a lot of contraptions that.
So he's not like a sorcerer?
He's not a sorcerer.
Oh, I thought he was. Okay.
No, that's the persona that he puts on.
Okay.
He's just a filmmaker.
Okay.
He's a character actually that got me into doing YouTube stuff because I played the Spider-Man 2 video game. And he's a huge part of that video game, and you dive into his backstory a little bit. You actually get to see his whole origin story in that video game, because he starts out as just a guy who wants to test Spider-Man, and then Spider-Man bests him, and he wants to become a villain and challenge him and everything, and that got me into filmmaking, and that eventually got me into YouTube stuff. So I love Mysterio a lot, but yeah, he's just a regular dude, and I think what's really interesting about Mysterio though is if Spider-Man and him are face to face, then Spider-Man will win every time. In fact, the animated series and the video game of the Spider-Man 2 video game both show this, where once you get past all of his traps and contraptions and illusions, Spider-Man always takes him out with a single punch.
Yeah.
Like the video game does a really fun thing where like his health bar grows and grows and grows and grows, and then you just punch him once and he's out and you beat him. And I love that idea. So he's not a very like physical threat. He's a very mental threat for Spider-Man. And then post-credits scene of Spider-Man 2. Here we go. You get like it's raining. It's like this dark property, right? You don't know what's going on, and then you see a guy. You see like I don't know, like animal heads on the walls, and you're just like, a guy maybe reading a newspaper. And you can tell that he's about to hunt down Spider-Man. It's Kraven the Hunter. We're doing Kraven's Last Hunt in the Spider-Man movie.
And who's playing him?
Danny Trejo. I don't know.
That's pretty good.
That's a pretty good one. I think off the top of my head. I would love that. And then maybe from there, because part of that story is that Spider-Man dies,
You know
and then
who
that
could play
could
him?
set up.
Joe Manganiello.
He sure could.
Right?
Yeah.
He sure could.
That's cool.
But yeah, that's my 3 part. And then Kraven tests him physically with all sorts of different. He hunts him down. He wears him out, and it's a different kind of a threat. I think it's not as my thing. The reason why it's never going to happen is because Kraven is not a very visually interesting character like someone like Mysterio or like Doc Ock. Or Vulture with all the flying and all the gadgets. Kraven is very much a very primal kind of character. He'll hunt Spider-Man down with things like, just rifles or something, which is not very interesting for audiences to look at, I think. But
Nemo was not an interesting character. Or sorry, Zemo was not an interesting character, and in my mind, one of the best Marvel villains out there.
You're not wrong. Maybe.
There you go.
I'm hoping for it. I would love for that to happen.
What do you want to see, Jay?
I think that sounds pretty good. I think that it'd be really fascinating to me. I'm not sure what to think of the Venom movie that's coming out. As of this recording, it hasn't come out yet.
Right.
But by the time Disney makes this buyout, their bid went way up.
Yeah, it did.
So they could be purchasing Fox. And I think that'd be really interesting to see the two Toms working together. Mostly because I respect the hell out of both Toms.
Yeah.
Tom Holland, Tom Hardy.
Although the problem with that is, if Tom Hardy's going to be Venom, we can't have Tom Hardy as Wolverine.
I know. That is a problem.
Right.
That is a problem. I know. But I do really think that could be an interesting one. I primarily say that because the most interesting scenario, and perhaps the most tragic scenario, is Tom Holland is done as Spider-Man and he's dead, right? Probably not likely. Like, even in the question, as the way Daryl worded it, was like, it's a safe assumption he's coming back. It's a very safe assumption.
But man, if they do that, going back and watching Infinity War again
is
way the most heartbreaking thing in the world.
It would be.
You'd be like, oh.
Exactly. That's why I kind of hope that they don't do that. But so if that scenario is not going to happen, I would like, they're getting progressively darker and darker with Spider-Man, and I would like to see that continue. I don't think we've seen a really dark film in the MCU yet. I would like to see a really dark film in the MCU, and I think it could be a Spider-Man film. Maybe you even include Venom. Maybe you even include Deadpool. I'm not sure with the Fox buyout. But I think that something really dark would be appropriate given what he's now experienced as a character.
Yeah. It'd be cool to see that incorporated.
Yeah.
I definitely just want to see Miles Morales brought in. And I want to see the trend of a different take on Spider-Man kind of continue. Like I don't necessarily feel like I do need Uncle Ben to be brought into it at any point. Like where it is okay. I don't need to see Gwen Stacy. I don't even need to see Harry Osborn or the Green Goblin or anything like that.
I think they're building a whole new cast of characters.
Yeah. I do want to see the relationship between MJ and Peter. Yeah. And I would love to see that really solidify and be like a tight relationship, almost like what Tony and Pepper have gotten to, and just see her be an important character in that whole world.
Now, in current or more modern comic books, the relationship between Peter and MJ has kind of been rebooted to a sense where they're not actually in a relationship, but they have a very tight friendship. And that's the kind of vibe that I want from them. Is I want their characters to build into a sense where, like, maybe they're not dating, maybe they're not in a relationship, but like they would do anything for each other. Like they're just that close. And I've always liked that vibe between them, I think.
Yeah, it's cool.
Well, that's all the questions I have.
Yeah.
Is there anything else that's just been burning in your brain that you want to say about Spider-Man before we wrap up?
I mean, maybe he could cameo in the Falcon Bucky road trip movie, but like other than that, I don't have anything.
Definitely. That would be cool.
Well, that is it for today's show. Special thanks to Scott. Thanks for coming by. Really appreciate it. Yeah, super fun. I had a great time. Make sure you go and subscribe to NerdSync. Some of the best edited videos that I've seen out there. Fantastic writing too.
Thank you so much.
Go check out NerdSync. Coming up next week on the Story Geeks podcast, we're going to start to dive into Jurassic World. We're going to have a Make It Better podcast about Jurassic World. We're going to dive into Jurassic Park coming up as well. And if you're a big Marvel fan, we'll actually be talking about Ant-Man soon.
Sorry, I'm going to stop you.
Why?
Nathan, you might have to edit this. Based on the release schedule, Jurassic World's already out.
Oh!
I made that mistake earlier too.
Yeah.
So
no worries. Hope you enjoy our Jurassic World.
So guys, it was really good. I listened to it. It was fantastic.
So instead, talk about Ant-Man, talk about Jurassic Park, and maybe even mention how Justin's going to come in and guest.
Oh, yeah, sure.
For a couple weeks. So.
Coming up next week on the Story Geeks podcast, we're going to kick off another Marvel podcast with Ant-Man. So that'll be awesome. We're going to dig deeper into Ant-Man and some of the themes there. We're also going to, you may have heard our Make It Better Jurassic World podcast. We're actually going to talk about Jurassic Park and go a little bit back. And Justin Weaver will be joining me for those couple podcasts and for live shows as well, which would be back on our normal live show time frame, Thursday nights at 7:30. So don't forget to subscribe. If you're watching live on YouTube, make sure you subscribe. So not only to NerdSync, but also to the Story Geeks. And be sure and subscribe where you get podcasts as well.
And to be clear, I'm not being fired. I'm just going on, I'm just going on vacation. Justin's
filling in.
Weeks.
Yeah.
So also be sure to connect with us on the Story Geeks Facebook group like we mentioned earlier. Let us know your thoughts on this show. Tell us what you want to see in the future of Spider-Man. Let us know if you have any ideas for future episodes for us. The link to that Facebook group and all the other links that you need are in the show notes.
Yeah, if you enjoyed today's show or any of the Story Geeks podcasts or live shows, please share our show with a geek friend. And to check out all of our other content, don't forget to head over to our blog at thestorygeeks.com.
Yeah, and really quickly before we go, Scott, just let everybody know where they can find you and NerdSync as well.
Yeah, you can find me on YouTube is the best way. YouTube.com/NerdSync Productions, as I think. We've had some trouble with the URL in the past. You can just search for NerdSync, NerdSync. That's how you spell it. So that's where I do video stuff. You can also follow me on Twitter and Instagram. The best place is just search for NerdSync on those. Or my personal stuff is at Scott Nicewander. Good luck spelling that. But yeah,
it's not how it sounds.
No, those are my main places.
Awesome. Thanks, man.
Yeah.
And as always, question everything in your favorite geek stories.
And always seek the truth.